made in a standing type, then that's a different issue. And one of the worst examples is Huckleberry Finn. There's an article that a very important bookman in Austin, Texas wrote. It was called Huck Finn Among the Issue Mongers, because a dealer will go to extreme lengths to try and prove to you that their copy is earlier than that guy's copy. Okay? And it's a lot of hair splitting, and it was usually done by people who don't really understand how a print shop and bindery work. So it's very difficult to specifically say this edition, this printing came out on a certain day. It's impossible to figure. Now the Bodleian Library in Oxford is a very scholarly library. They got a copy of, because they're the deposit for printed material in England, they got a copy of the first folio of Shakespeare. Well, in 1632, along comes the second folio. Guess what they did with the 1623 first folio? They threw it out. They threw it out because it was superseded by a better, newer edition. It's a very scholarly way to look at it. Well, Lord knows what happened to that first folio. So the English idea of first editions is the earliest thing off the press. But the French approach is the best edition, which is the best binding, the most complete, the best illustrations. It's a very different approach. So French libraries tend to have very elaborate, but not necessarily the first appearance of something. So by 1500, there were print shops in every major European city except Russia. And any idea how many books were printed before 1500? Any idea?
None.
About 20 million. There's a lot of books. And it did nothing but go higher. The numbers went higher after 1500. Very prolific. So, Gutenberg we already mentioned, and Fust and Schoeffer, very important successors. Swainheim and Panarts, with harsh Germanic names, they went south to Italy to a monastery at Subiaco, and they did some of the finest printing work of that period. Very desirable. William Caxton was the first English printer. Now, if you have even a fragment of a Caxton printing, it is fabulously expensive and valuable. This is not something that you can just find on the open market these days. Wynkyn de Ward took over when Caxton died. William Aldous is one of the most important. He was the first of the scholar printers. He was in Venice, and there were people escaping from Constantinople and bringing manuscripts from Persia and from Greece. And so Aldous had a shop policy that if you did not speak Greek, if you lapsed into the vernacular Italian, you got fined. So, and he turned out some of the best editions of the classics. He rescued the Greek and Roman classics from loss. Then John Baskerville in the 18th century, excellent typography, brilliant English printer. Late 19th century, during the arts and crafts movement, Kelmscott Press. This was a return, William Morris and Edward Burne-Jones, coming back to a very fine design of typography. And the Dove's Bindery in England, in London as well. Very, very important, pretty books. So, incunables, incunabula, incunabulum. This is, it's an arbitrary word that means cradle. It's from the cradle period of printing, which is arbitrarily was decided that 1501 was the cutoff point. Now, printers back then didn't say, whoops, it's December 31st on 1501, change the presses. We're not gonna make incutables anymore. It's strictly arbitrary, but it's a magic barrier for buying books. Anything that was printed before 1501, you probably add another 0 to the price. It's simply more expensive because of relative numbers. Now, if you go to the Huntington, in the main exhibition area, look up onto the balcony and you will see cases and cases of books. These are all incunabula. Now, the reason that a lot of these incutables are in such wonderful shape is because they are boring. They are literally these tedious religious tracts arguing such things as how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, and other pressing issues of the 15th century. So, yeah, they're in good shape. But popular books, popular stories, for example, The Ship of Fools. There's a copy on display back in the exhibition area. And The Shepherd's Calendar. They're not as old, but they were literally read to pieces like a farmer's almanac. That's how many almanacs from the early 18th century are still around? Very few. Poor Richard's Almanac. I think you've probably heard about that. Very fabulously expensive if you can find one, because they were used. Okay? So the value of these things goes up based on availability. So in the 16th century, it's the end of the Renaissance, so we're getting into humanism and poetry and all sorts of fine literature. And because of the technology, we've got better illustrations. They're woodcut, but the techniques are getting better. 17th century, John Milton wrote a little piece called Areopagitica. It was arguing for freedom of the press, because back then, if you wanted to print something, you had to have permission. If you didn't have permission, then you're in deep trouble. So a lot of the books will have a page called an imprimatur. And it states that, yeah, this was blessed by whomever. There's a book on display in the gallery that was expurgated by the Spanish Inquisition. Back in the 16th century, if you had a book that was not approved, you could be snatched off the street and thrown into prison just because you owned that book. Doesn't sound very fair, does it? Oh, you've got a Harry Potter. That's evil. You can't have that. Off to jail. So, but then, because of technology, cheaper and cheaper editions were coming along. So, more people could afford them. There's a book back there that, from 1601, that it says up right on the title page, the price is 3 shillings 4 pence. Well, that was fairly expensive for that time, because a shilling was approximately a day's wage in 1601. And science. Now we're starting to really get into scientific achievement. All right? Newton and Robert Boyle. Many, many different folks. Now, Age of Enlightenment. More scientific discovery coming along. Franklin, for example. And mass production. The numbers of books being produced just simply goes up and up and up. And they're cheaper editions. 19th century, we've got the Romantics, Romanticism coming in, and steam power presses. Okay, now we can start banging these things out in big quantities.